Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hey everyone, Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's wonderful to have your company for another episode of our show. And in this show, we're going to talk about a thorny issue, and that is the generational divide. And we're going to unpack why is it that from time to time, each generation gets frustrated with the other generations, whether there's eye rolling from the baby boomers about the younger generation or the younger generation kind of calling out the catch cry, settle down boomer or other things in between. It's not uncommon for us to misunderstand one another. And in this episode, I'm joined by Diane Demetre, who is an expert in helping us understand the things that unite us rather than the things that divide us. And in this conversation, Diane artfully, skillfully, compassionately shares the things that are important to each of the generations so that we can start that process of understanding. And I think it's really useful to realize that as each of us age and go through life, there's always going to be a younger generation coming through, and the frustration from one generation to the next is nothing new. It's been around since time began, and it will probably be around for years, decades, millennia to come as well. And so we've got to kind of go through this journey of understanding one another. And as I said, Diane artfully, skillfully, and compassionately unpacks that. What I really appreciated about this conversation was the focus on those things that do unite us, and trying to understand where each person or each generation is coming from allows us to think about how we can best interact. And if you're a younger generation, maybe you can think about, how do I tap into the wisdom and experience of those who are a few years ahead of me in life so that I can shortcut my pathway to success? And equally, if you're a member of the older generations, how is it that you can tap into the expertise and skill and perspectives that younger generations bring to the modern world? And equally, how can we equip the younger generation to assume leadership roles that are going to be vacated as those of us in Generation X or baby boomers vacate those leadership roles and move into, senior years, retirement, whatever you want to call it? Surely those younger generation members are going to need to be well equipped. And I think that the older generation have a role in helping them do that. So Diane, as I said, is an expert in this field, and I'd really encourage you to check out her work. You can head across to dianedemetre.com and check out her website there. Or equally, if you want to find her on LinkedIn, head across to Diane Demetre Speaks, because in both of those arenas, you'll find out more about the work that she does, and there's tons and tons of resources there that's going to really help you on your journey, whether it be understanding the generational divide, which is what we talk about today, but also talking about leadership, being able to dare more, how to have more courage, which I think in the business world we need to embrace with gusto, because we are living through periods of rapid change, and of course the only constant is change, and how we have courage to adapt and evolve is going to be really important if our business is going to not just survive but thrive into the future. So without any further ado, here's Diane Demetre. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoyed it. Diane, welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast. Thanks for joining us all the way from the Gold Coast. How's things up in your neck of the woods?
Well, the Gold Coast is always beautiful. Today it's very, very rainy, but hey, who can complain? It's a beautiful place to be.
It is a beautiful spot to be. That's the old saying, beautiful one day, perfect the next. So I'm always envious. Even in storm season in Queensland, it's still pretty spectacular. So it's gorgeous.
It is. There's something, nothing like a tropical storm. It does something for your soul. It's wonderful.
It does. Diane, you've been well regarded in your space as a speaker around leadership, around being fearless, being courageous, daring greatly, all those wonderful sorts of things. And you're most well known from your entertainment background, and of course now your keynote speaking. I'm always curious to ask people about their backstory, because in my experience, rarely do people put on their year 12 end of school form, hey, I want to be a keynote speaker, or I want to be talking about leadership, or I want to be talking about being fearless. How did you find your way into entertainment and then into the work that you do now?
It all started when I wiggled my nappy off when I was 4, and my mother turned to my father and said, maybe we should send her to ballet classes.
Right.
So that was an inspired decision on their part. It really was, because little did they know that they were actually giving me an opportunity to get onto the pathway of my destiny. So for the next 26 years, I fell in love with the entertainment industry. I was a dancer, a choreographer, a director. I worked on the stages throughout Australia. And at that time, you still had morning television where you had dancers on the morning television. So we're going back now. I'm dating myself. And so I worked on television as well. And then I scored the top job in Australia when I became the assistant director and choreographer to legendary Las Vegas director, Jerry Jackson. And we staged the biggest multi-million-dollar shows ever seen in the country. Actually, they were the first productions at Jupiter's Casino on the Gold Coast, way back in the heyday. So, it was very, very, very glamorous, very sophisticated. So it was an amazing time. It was, the mid-'80s when everybody was, full of energy, full of optimism, and full of real future focus. The 80s and the 90s had that big future focus. So I staged those with Jerry, and we did stars and galaxies. And, back in those days, to spend $1 million on a production was massive.
Yeah.
So that's how that all happened. And then one day I did the unthinkable, and I turned down my producer's sexual advances.
Whoa. Hang on. Okay. Geez, there's a story.
Yeah, that was the turning point.
I reckon it would be a massive turning point.
Yeah, so I turned down my producer's sexual advances, and he promptly sacked me for being too fat.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know that was probably the 80s or 90s, but I still can't believe that.
Oh, yeah.
Actually.
And, of course, he'd picked the wrong girl, because I just went, you know what? That's not going to work for me. I called up the union, and the union helped me. And at that time, there were no industrial relations laws in the country. There was not even an Industrial Relations Act.
Wow.
So, no, nothing. You see, and this is what happens unless you've lived it. You've got no recollection of all of this stuff that goes on. I say to young women nowadays, you don't know how easy you've got it. Now, of course, I'll be held down for that, but nevertheless, I've said it now. It's out there.
It's on the record.
Yes, there we go. And I stand by it, like I stood by my own integrity during this time. So, the only option I had was to take him to the Australian Arbitration and Conciliation Commission. So I took him there, and the commissioner found no grounds for my dismissal because I'd taken him to the commission on unfair dismissal and sexual discrimination. There were no grounds for my dismissal, so I got reinstated. Now, I was so naive because I thought you could put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And, of course, I go back to the showroom to take on my job as the person responsible for keeping the show running, because Jerry had gone back to Vegas, long ago. It was my show now. And then I wasn't coping very well at all because I was very upset. And not only that, he'd paid the cast off not to speak to me. So they all got increases in their wages if they wouldn't speak to me. Most of them took that. Most of them took the increase in pay and then ostracised me, bar a handful. So that really hurt. That was a terrible betrayal. That really cut me to the quick. So I didn't do so well. So the doctor gave me some time off and said, you need to take some time off because your stress levels are through the roof. So whilst I was on sick leave, he sacked me again. So back to court we went. And so we go back to the Australian Arbitration and Conciliation Commission, but this time the producer actually sent a QC. So he paid a QC to try and cut me down on the stand. But, of course, he couldn't because, if you're telling the truth, you're telling the truth. His legal people went to the commissioner and said, if you reinstate her again, we're going to take it to federal court. That's how far. We will take it. We will take it to the highest court in the land because I don't want her back. And so the commissioner didn't reinstate me. He was terribly upset. He said, I can't reinstate you. I'm concerned for your health. And I'm concerned about what that man may do to you. And so back then I lost everything. I lost my identity, my job, my opportunity for anything in the future because it was front page news across Australia for months. Even Jan Event wanted me on 60 Minutes
Wow.
back in the day, and I turned it down. I needed, Harry and Miller to be promoting me. I was devastated. I was absolutely gutted. So I lost everything: money, work opportunities, my career, my identity. I couldn't even get a job. I remember this very clearly. I couldn't get a job as a cleaner in a motel on the Gold Coast because I'd been splashed across the front pages of all the newspapers. And can you believe that the owner said to me, "No, you're too glamorous to clean toilets"?
Wow.
I was really in a really dark place because I'd lost everything. And of course, I'd lost my identity because this had been my pinnacle. This was my dream come true, that was taken away from me by this man because I wouldn't sleep with him. And so there was that betrayal. There was the betrayal of the cast, and I couldn't get out of bed. And then one day, my mother and my boyfriend at the time were very concerned, and they called on my dresser from the casino and said, "You've got to come because we don't know what she's going to do. We really don't." And my dresser stood in the doorway of my bedroom and said, "Get out of bed." I said, "I'm not getting out of bed." And I knew her so well that she would have stood there, rooted to the spot for days on end until I got out of bed. So I eventually got out of bed. And there was a moment when everything fell away and I had such clarity, and I heard a voice say to me, "Dare more." So if you've ever watched the Ten Commandments, the old movie, the Ten Commandments, and I believe it was John Huston played the voice of God, and it was nearly like the voice of God reverberated in my head and basically said, "Dare more." And my big epiphany came because I couldn't go out. I couldn't lift my head because people were noticing me and saying, "You're that fat dancer who got sacked," because that was the headlines. Dancer sacked for being too fat all across Australia. And people would point at me and say, "Oh, you're that fat dancer who got sacked." Needless to say, I wasn't fat. I only got fat the moment I said to him, "No, I won't sleep with you." Right? That's when I got overweight. All of a sudden I got overweight. Up until then I was spelt. So, talk about discrimination. But anyway, eventually I realised, well, what am I going to do? And so one of my other loves, aside from entertaining and bringing joy to people, was reading. So I had no money. So all I could do was go to a secondhand bookstore. So I went to a secondhand bookstore filled with shame and humiliation and just absolutely gutted. And it was as if I had somebody behind me put their hand in the centre of my back and push me through the door. It was so strong, I turned around to see if somebody was there, but there wasn't. And I thought, that's very odd. Anyway, I'm walking through the secondhand bookstore and I'm looking around at all the shelves, and I had no idea what I was doing there, except I knew if I read something, maybe that would help. And I had my boyfriend with me at the time. And as I'm walking down one of the corridors, a book literally jumps off the shelf and lands at my feet. And I looked at him and I said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." I bent down and I picked up the book, and for the princely sum of $2, I held the first novel of my Broadway idol in my hands. It was Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb. And I raced home and I read that book from cover to cover in one sitting. And in that book, Shirley MacLaine talked about her life and the struggle in her life and her spiritual awakening moment. And so I used the same question that she used as I drifted to sleep. And I said to myself, I want to meet myself. I want to meet myself. And just as I drifted off, I sat bolt upright, and I swear that my room was filled with blinding light. There was this enormous sense of love and relief. My head was clear, my heart was open, and all of a sudden I realised how the whole thing worked, how consciousness worked, how the universe worked, how it wasn't the producer's fault, that we all create our own reality through the intentionality that we set, and everything came flooding in like the Akashic records downloading into my brain. And from that moment on, I've been on a conscious journey of how do I create the life that I'm creating moment by moment by moment. And in that process, that's when things changed. Then I moved from that career and I moved into personal development more and became a stress and life skills therapist at the Highland Park Medical Centre for years. Then I moved into the corporate world as a special events manager, working for Disney, working for the Mrs. World pageant here. And then I moved into big business with my third husband, and we ran Qantas Valet Parking across Australia for 12 years, had over 250 staff. We had a 4-star award-winning resort in Vanuatu called Tamanu on the Beach. So it's been a conscious journey for me. And of course, the stage has always called me. I love plugging into people. I just love it. It's what turns me on most of all. And so it was a natural progression to go back onto the stage and share my insights and experiences, particularly with leaders, in how they can master their leadership in their lives more effectively based on all of these decades of experience that I've had. And so, you know, I've gone back onto the stage as a speaker and I love every moment of it. It's just the best.
Wow, that is not quite what I expected when I asked that question. But I think it gives such great context. It gives such great understanding of how you've ended up where you have, and hopefully it brings a sense of peace and closure after that horrible episode from your producer back in the day. I'm really conscious of the work that you do in the leadership space, and we're talking off here about the research and the work that's really fascinating at the moment, which I think is going to be really interesting and fascinating to our audience as well, which is about that generational divide. Why did you become interested and fascinated in that? What captured your attention? What was it that you thought, I've got to read more about this, study more about this, understand more about this? Why did that become a topic that captured your curiosity and your attention so dramatically?
Probably because it's a lived experience. It's experiential intelligence for me, in the respect that when we had Qantas Valet Parking, it was a very unusual contract in the respect that we were given the contract with only an 8-week lead time. In that 8-week lead time, we had to recruit 150 staff. We had to uniform them. We had to train them. We had to get new IT systems in place. We had to get a booking platform actually developed out of the States. And then we had a 5-hour handover from the previous operator. So the previous operator at midnight in 4 sites across Australia, Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane and Sydney, at midnight, the previous operator, who'd been there for 21 years, ripped out all of their equipment out of each of those sites, and we had 5 hours to bring in everything, to bring in our equipment, our teams, everything, do all the cross-checks, do the audits of the cars that were sitting currently out in the parking sites, and then open the doors at 5 o'clock so that the demanding Qantas Valet Parking customers, when they flooded through, would not see any change in service except an improvement of service.
Yes.
Being able to do that and lead 4 teams and recruit and train and ensure everybody came together was my responsibility. And so I had 3 generations then. I had 3 generations. I had baby boomers, I had Gen X's, and I had the millennials. But I didn't have any Gen Zs, okay? So I had to bring those 3 generations together and make sure that on that night, we didn't have time for misunderstandings. We didn't have time for people to be offended. We didn't have time. I'm so over that word.
Yeah, me too.
So we didn't have time for any of that. It had to be done. So my role was to bring everybody together and make it happen. So I've lived that experience. And now we have the fourth generation. The Gen Zs are in there, all those lovely fresh faces you see in organisations everywhere that basically are driving most of the older generations insane because they don't get them. But you see, they're a fabulous breed. I really like the Gen Zs. It's about actually understanding what they're here for and what they can teach us. And I think I'm also very lucky in many ways because I've chosen throughout my life not to have children. Even though I was trained as a school teacher, I chose not to be a parent this time, although I've been a very involved step parent. And because I bring that experience to the table, I'm very open to seeing people for who they are rather than putting labels on them and seeing what they're deficient in, as many other generations will do. Because, I work with companies and, I'll sit there and there'll be baby boomer executives and they'll be grumbling away about, they're just not committed and they don't put in the hard work. And in my day, we made sacrifice for success. And they are all so entitled. But of course, they're not entitled, they're enlightened.
Okay.
It's a shift of perspective, and this is what I found, and that's what I discovered too when I went through my career crisis. It was my shift of perspective that changed. So if we shift our perspective on how we see Gen Zs, all of a sudden they're not entitled, and yes, they like their comfort and convenience, and unless there's a project that interests them, they don't want to do it. Well, let's be sensible. We all sort of have felt like that, except we've been conditioned to go along, to comply. And that's why I'm always encouraging leaders to become bold thinkers with brave hearts who make a big difference. Bold thinkers, brave hearts who make a big difference. Now, of course, that's got me into trouble all my life, but would I change it? No, because, what's the point of lying on your deathbed and saying, I wish I was bolder, I wish I'd been braver, I wish I made a bigger impact or a bigger difference? So maybe the Gen Zs aren't entitled. Maybe they've incarnated with a level of enlightenment that they're wanting to share with the rest of the world, except we're not giving them the opportunity to share that. And maybe that's why they run around and want to throw pumpkin soup on the Mona Lisa and everything else. I mean, we there's a whole range of different perspectives, and I'm just one of those people who likes to get everybody at the table and let's see if we can find resolution and actually find ways through it.
Let's talk about those four generations you've spoken about, the boomers, the Xers, the millennials, and then the Gen Zs. And for our Australian audiences, Gen Zs, if you're losing the translation there, for our international audience, Gen Zs. So can we talk a little bit about the characteristics and traits of each of those generations? Because I'm an Xer, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and like I'm going to stand by it as well. I still see some of the Gen Zs and I scratch my head and I think, seriously? Like, are you for real, dude? Or dudette? So help me understand what you see as some of the essential characteristics of each of those generations, and equally, what are their strong points? Because each generation is a product of their environment, product of their upbringing, product of their time, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And I think, like, before we vilify the Gen Zs, and we're not going to go and vilify them, but equally, I think the Gen Zs probably also need to adopt the same attitude as well. And every and again, every generation. What can we learn from other cohorts? What can we learn that's useful to us in our day-to-day living? How can we engage in a meaningful way rather than just throw mud? Like the Gen Zs, the boomers own all the money and we want to disrupt the real estate market and, da-da-da. And you hear the settle-down boomer kind of trope and all the rest of it. You kind of think, well, that's not particularly respectful either. So I'd love to ask what you see as the essential characteristics, both good and bad, of each of those generations.
Okay, well, let's start with the baby boomers. Baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964.
Yep.
And they're really characterised by being an optimistic generation because their parents bred them to be optimistic. Their parents had gone through terrible times in World War II, so they were encouraged to have hope. So, baby boomers are competitive and they're, they can be very team-oriented, but they're workaholics. We tend to be workaholics. I'm a boomer, and we believe that achievement comes after paying your dues. That's a baby boomer mentality, and that you have to sacrifice for success. And that's why boomers find it really hard with the Gen Zs, because they're looking at them going, what the hell? You just think everything's going to come to you. But that's all right. They got a bit of growing to do yet. So that's the baby boomers. Baby boomers make very strong leaders. Okay, they're very strong leaders. If you need a job done, you'll probably ask a boomer to get it done. And they're very courageous. And in many times, those great strengths of dependability and being the person for the task can also create a disconnect, because boomers then feel that, well, come on, everybody, get on with it. Let's go. And I know that for myself. I know if I have a meeting, I want the meeting to be quick, brusque, let's go. Let's get it done. Whereas I have to really pull myself back if somebody else is holding the meeting, because they're going to, if they're a millennial, they're going to want to have a chat about how people feel and everything else. And it's like, oh, dear me, we're wasting time. You see? So if I run a meeting, it's like, how are we doing? We're all good, right? Let's get to it. Fast meeting is a good meeting, and let's move on so we can get more stuff done. That's a boomer for you. And if you want things done, that's what you do with baby boomers. Baby boomers have a bit of a mantra that they've grown up with, which is, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. That's how boomers sort of have grown up, thinking, well, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. I better get it done. I've got to get this thing done. And they value hard work and commitment above all else, because that's how they've been rewarded through their life. Then we go to our Gen Zs, and of course our
Gen Xs.
Gen X, my apologies.
That's okay.
So that's your cohort. So
that's my crew, yep.
So you grew up in a time where you had to be very adaptable, and you were to be able to adapt to things going on around you without necessarily a lot of support and help. So you've ended up being very flexible. You're a bit skeptical, but you're also very independent. So you're quick to move on if your employer fails to meet your needs. And the Gen Xs tend to be resistant to change at work if it affects their personal lives. They'll do it, but they're just a little resistant to it. So they are fiercely independent leaders in many ways, but they too find it difficult to embrace their younger colleagues and that energy and that sort of, whatever type of feel, because Gen Xers have commitment. They also have commitment. They look at it, well, if the job's got to be done, it's just got to be done. Let's just get it done. So they have that type of approach. So they can be very self-reliant. They can be flexible. They're very observant. They see things going on everywhere, and they've learned to thrive even in challenging times. So Gen Xers are, always thinking on their feet. They're thinking on their feet. And I believe that the real mantra that suits the Gen Xers is that they think outside the box. They think outside the box many times. And that's the Gen Xers. And of course, the Gen Xers by 2028 will outnumber the baby boomers. So we're seeing a big shift at the moment. So when we see that shift from a demographic point of view, we also get that shift from a universal consciousness point of view. And that's what people are struggling with because of AI and everything else. People just don't know. So there's more and more uncertainty that is underneath everything at the moment. There's like this energy of uncertainty underneath things, and people can't necessarily pick what it is, but they can feel it, they can sense it. And that's very, very disruptive for human beings, because we do like security. We do like certainty. Yes, we like variety, but variety on our terms. So this uncertainty that has been really amplified through COVID, and it's still there. People think, oh, well, that's all over. No, it's not. There's that uncertainty that is there all the time. So the more we're aware of that and we give ourselves a break, the better.
Okay.
So then we have the millennials, and the millennials were also called Gen Y, and the millennials were born 1981 to 2000. Now, the millennials are very collaborative. They're achievement-oriented, yes, but they seek challenge and growth and development. They like work to be sort of fun, but they also want a work-life balance, even though change is, unsettling for them as well. They will leave an organisation if the organisation refuses to change. They probably embrace change a little bit better than definitely the boomers or the Gen Xers. So my stepson is a millennial leader, and he leads hundreds of people in New South Wales TAFE. And his greatest challenge at the moment is engaging his people, keeping them engaged amidst constant change. And his other challenge is that his baby boomers are leaving, and they're taking with them institutional knowledge that they can't be replaced. And it's really difficult for him. So he's finding it hard to get the boomers to download. And of course, as we know, the experience that we have and what that's taught us and the lessons we've learned and the relevance it brings to us isn't something that we necessarily can just download. That's the challenge for millennial leaders. And of course, millennials love teamwork. They love to collaborate. They love to get their team all focused towards a common goal, and let's all set off for it. So that's the energy that millennials bring to work. They're very purpose-driven. Millennials want a purpose. And they want that, and that's why you'll have found in the last number of years people doing purpose-driven leadership about the purpose. But of course, purpose is an individual motivator, for want of a better word, and it's about your own purpose, and it's about finding your own purpose. And many times your own purpose reveals itself. You can go digging around in there forever and not find it. So we have to be willing to be open so that your own purpose can be revealed. And of course, their mantra is follow your passion, follow your passion. Whatever your passion is, follow your passion. And that identifies the millennials. And then, of course, the Gen Zs, bless them, they're a different breed altogether, born 2001 to 2020. And the Gen Zs are our first global generation. They are our first global generation. They've been born into a world that isn't local or national, it's global. They see their environment as global. And I think once we start to associate with that and we start to think, yeah, that's very true. Like for the rest of us, we were born into a family, into a community, into a country, and then, we would pack our bags and we would go over to Europe or whatever to see what was going on over there, to get a taste of the world. Not the Gen Zs. They never have to leave. They don't even have to leave their device in their hand to see the world. They have that whole global mindset. So they're very entrepreneurial. I've watched Gen Zs. Boy, they're entrepreneurial. What a great asset to have in an operation, in an organisation. To take that innate entrepreneurialism and bring it into the organisation. They're very progressive, and one of their characteristics is that they're less focused. They are less focused. They're the scrolling generation. And so we have to understand that. Now, from an employer's point of view, employers don't want less focused employees. And that's what the Gen Zs have to learn. If they really want to work their way through the ranks, yes, they will be loved for their creativity and their adaptability and their tech-savvy skills. But if they really want to make the big time, they've got to learn to focus.
So I'm noticing I'm having a slight emotional reaction at the moment, Diane, as my Gen X hairs on the back of my neck are just starting to stand up on end. So I have to give full disclosure around that. because you mentioned something really interesting, and I want to touch on this point because you mentioned that boomers retiring, particularly boomers retiring, and probably some of the older X's aren't too far away from that as well, right? Yep. I always think Generation X is like boomer light.
Yes, yeah, that's a perfect way of saying it. I love it.
I think the attitude shift from X to millennials or X to Y is probably where things started to really shift in terms of differences from one generation to the next. Yes, every generation, I'm sure my parents used to scratch their head at the things I did. I scratch my head at the things my kids do, all those sorts of things. But in terms of understanding one another, I think boomers and X's probably understand one another pretty well. Ys and Zs probably understand each other relatively well. This is just me hypothesizing. But you mentioned that the boomers and I've just added some of the X's are kind of getting close to retirement. And and this is me just probably saying that I'm going to get some hate mail for this, so please, I should give you the email address to send your hate mail to. But one of the things I've noticed is that Generation Z don't want the download because they think they know it all already. What could someone over the age of 60 or 65 potentially offer me? And yes, that's a sweeping statement. Yes, it's a generalization. I know it's not true for everyone. I know it's probably manifestly false on lots of different levels. But from someone who is sitting in that 50-plus demographic, sometimes it can feel like, yes, as much as we older people are trying to understand Generation Z, particularly Generation Z, Generation Y, there seems to be, I can just read it on Google. I can just find that information on ChatGPT or whatever it is. Why do I need an older person's experience? So why are we not valuing older generations perhaps in a way that we could or should?
From my point of view, it's because of electronic devices.
Yeah.
Whilst parents have been helicopter parents, and you can send me the hate mail on this too, parents, I don't mind.
Yeah.
So while parents shirk their responsibility and give their their children devices, I've seen this everywhere, while parents hand off their parenting duties to an electronic device, this is what's happened.
And my generation is complicit in that, I'll just say straight up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have Gen X friends who've been handing devices to their children since they were little. I saw some woman walking around with a child in a pram the other day. The child was barely 2 and it could barely hold this child thing, the computer or whatever in its hands. I mean, no wonder they don't think we have anything to offer. No wonder this generation thinks that we're totally replaceable by electronic devices, because that's what they were taught by their parents. They were taught that by their parents. And so we need, as parents, to take more responsibility. Rearing a child is the most important job in the world. I knew at the age of 11 I wouldn't have children. Why? Because I knew I couldn't split myself in two and do both things well. I couldn't. And I don't care what anybody says, and don't talk, now the women hate me. You can't be a super mum, a super woman, a super career woman, a super everything unless you're going to literally burn yourself out. And why do we have such high burnout rates? Why do we have such high stress rates? I know it's hard. I know people want to have beautiful homes and 2 cars, and we've got to have this and we've got to have that. And I understand that we do have to have those things. But at the end of the day, we cannot, if we want to feel valued by the next generation, if we want to be able to have connection and make our world evolve and excel, we cannot shirk our responsibilities. We're the adults in the room. We're the adults in the room. The Gen Zs aren't the adults in the room yet.
Not yet. Their turn will come.
Their turn will come. And we have to provide them with the time. We have to provide them with time and make them feel that they're valued. Because if we don't think they're valuable enough to put down our phone and to go and sit down and talk to them and to build Lego with them, I mean, the amount of hours I spend with my granddaughter building Lego, if I thought about it, I'd go insane. But I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for her, because she wants the company. She wants me there. She wants to see a human being next to her. And we have to take this responsibility.
So it's really interesting. And just on that, I'm on the record for saying, rightly or wrongly, I think women have a really tough gig.
Oh, yeah.
Because we deal with a lot of business owners, and I feel like there are challenges that women have to contend with that men just don't.
Correct.
What I observe working with women in, lots of different women in lots of different environments is that rightly or wrongly, a lot of the family duties still fall to women, and then they're running their business on top of that. And typically a guy doesn't have those same responsibilities. Now, I'm not commenting on what's right, what's wrong, who's right, who's wrong. I don't want to get into the gender politics of it all. I'm just observing as an observation that I see women having to juggle more balls than men as a generalised rule.
Yeah.
And I agree with you about not being able to do it all. I understand the difficulty. And I think, as the father of two daughters, I want them to be able to have it all, but I also understand that comes with challenges, compromises, hard decisions, etc., etc., etc. So I don't want to make light of any of those sorts of things. We see pressures on families perhaps that when I was growing up weren't as high as they are now. And so just to give the parents a little bit of slack, I think it is a tough gig, and I think sometimes you just do the best you can do. And are you going to be managing perfectly all the time? No. Have I made mistakes as a parent? Oh, how many days you got? Because like epic parent fail number 3,075,000, whatever it is. But that said, this disconnect I think is real. This reliance on technology, the taking away of the human connection, spending time building Lego. One of my fondest childhood memories is building Lego with particularly my mother, actually. Dad was often out of work, so it'd usually be after school. Mum and I would make some or whatever it was. And I really think that is a very tactile experience. And you don't even need to be talking, but it's just having the presence of someone there. And I think it does create a relationship that perhaps is not being created for those that are absorbed in their technology. So as a Gen Xer, as much as I might sometimes scratch my head and shake my head with the Gen Zs, I also understand the Gen Zs are a product of the Gen Xers. So where did we go wrong? How can we learn from that? How can we try and course correct if that's possible? And how do we set those younger generations up for success? Now, I've just said I think the Gen Zs would do well to look at the older generations and download as much as they can. But I also think the older generations could look at the younger generations and think not just what can we learn from those generations, but how can we proactively support them? How can we proactively give them the best start? And you're right, the Gen Zs are not the adults in the room metaphorically. Yes, they might be of adult age, but in terms of key roles and responsibilities, it's often the X's and the boomers. And I do think that for our world to continue on, for our societies to continue on, we need to equip the millennials and the Gen Zs better than perhaps we have thus far. So I wanted to ask you, for the boomers and the X's listening to this, what can we do to equip them best? How can we support them? Because our time is going to come to an end, and we're going to be off the playing field, and they're going to be leading the team, and we want them to lead the team well. So how do we help them?
One of the things that everybody can do, whether it's organisationally or whether you're in a family, and that is to stop. Just take time. We tend to schedule everything else. We'll schedule a to-do list, we'll schedule this, we'll schedule a meeting. But when do we schedule the time, for instance, in a family, to be with the children? Not to be chauffeur and drive them to the sports and stand and watch, but to actually schedule time. The old idea of having your dinner at a family table with nothing else going on, no TV, no phones, nothing, is one of the most powerful ways to create human family connection. And then every night to go around the table and ask simple value-based questions. What do you appreciate about your day today? What are you thankful for your day to day? That gives a shift of perspective, a shift of mindset, to shift to something that is positive, not what happened at school. Oh, well, this happened. No. Make the family meal something that is positive, uplifting, and appreciative. That's one way. Just slotting that into a person's family, day in, day out, day in, day out, is powerful. Now, I understand families go off and do things and one of the kids isn't home because they're off at sport or whatever it is, but whoever is there, do it with them. And then when the other child comes home, stop as the parent. Stop, sit next to them while they're eating, even if you've eaten. Sit next to them. Don't let them sit there and look at their phone. Sit next to them and talk to them and appreciate them. And so these little things are things that you and I grew up with. They were just normal, standard behaviours in the family. And so what's happened is that they've been lost. So if we start to put them back into the family, we're making a difference. And that whole, I call it, you've got to plug in and play with each other. I think we all came into the world cable ready. And at our solar plexus, that's where we plug in. And we can plug into each other and we can play. That's where we get our energy. And the more we use that visualization to plug in and play with people, the better the energy will be. Now, organisationally, in your business, my question is always when I go in and do audits, I ask companies, what's your mantra? What's your mantra? Not your vision, not your mission, none of those things. What's your mantra? What's that one statement that inspires everybody, that brings everybody together? Because if you have buy-in from your boomers, your Gen Xers, your millennials and your Gen Zs, you put them all around the table and say, right, give me a statement that turns you on, that will motivate and inspire you every day. And I know that people can love him or loathe him, but Donald Trump proved how powerful a mantra is. Make Australia great again. America, see, I think we need to make Australia great. That's a real faux pas for me. So make America great again. And of course, he had every generation behind him because he found a mantra, a statement, something that turned them all on. And so from a business point of view, I would ask business leaders, have you brought in every one of your team? Have you put them around a table and said, if we had to define our mantra, what would it be? What would turn you on? What would inspire you today? And if you had to make a decision today, what's the mantra that you could use to help you know what decision to make?
What I'm picking up from this is so often our frustrations are born out of what we see as our differences when perhaps we could be focusing more on our similarities.
Absolutely.
Dan, I won't keep you too much longer because I'm mindful of the time and you've been incredibly generous sharing your wisdom and experience thus far. And I want to just say thank you because some of the topics we've touched on can be a little bit of a hotbed of emotions and can be a hotbed of controversy, but I appreciate your ability to navigate that with grace. I think I've just been reflecting as we're talking, I have a 20-year-old daughter, she's studying law and she's now working at a law firm. And so she is Gen Z through and through. And what's been really interesting to me is watching her in the workplace and getting a little bit of feedback around that. And for the parents of the Gen Zs who might be scratching their heads, just all that good parenting, all that effort does actually, you might not always see it at home, but you do get the feedback elsewhere.
Yeah, it pays off. It does pay off. We've got to be willing to be patient. You know, I say infinite patience brings immediate results. So, you know, every generation gets it together. Sure, there'll be a few that slip through the net. But at the end of it, if we put in the love, if we put in the time, if we put in the attention, and if we give good values and guidance, they'll work it out. And as you know, as my mother used to say to me, you can't put old heads on, you can't put, you know, an old head on young shoulders. You got to let them, experience it and live and grow up.
100%. And I think that's the thing for employers who've just got to remember that we were young once. People scratch their head about us as well. And I'm Yeah, just grateful that there were no smartphones and cameras to capture all my silliness in the day, which is great. So, I feel for the younger generation because they have pressures that we don't. Diane, you've been really, really kind to come and talk to us. Thank you so much. If there was any last pieces of advice or wisdom that you'd like to share, any final comments or words?
Probably what I would encourage everybody is to be a bold thinker. Think outside the box. Do research. Just don't sit there and be, compliant and think that everything you get from mainstream media is true. Go out, look for other resources. What you're getting off AI is also got a bias on it. Go out, read books. I know books, but books are really valuable, and old books if you can. Be a bold thinker. Be a bold thinker firstly. The next would be to build a brave heart. Be brave, step up, have the courage. Sometimes, it's worth stepping up and having an opinion, and you might feel a bit scared about it, but what the hell? It's just an opinion. And then the last thing is ask yourself, how am I making a big difference in my world? Can I make a big difference? Of course you can. You can if you're bold and brave. So just ask yourself, how am I making a difference today? How am I doing that? And then go out there, be bold, brave and big, and see what happens. And if you don't like it, that's all right. It's not a mistake. It's just a result. Change it and move on.
Yeah, love it.
Don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. I love it. Fantastic. Life is all about experimenting. If you don't like it, try again, do something else. Love it.
That's it.
Yeah. Diane, thank you once again. You've been incredibly generous. I know we've been talking for a long time now, and I'm grateful to you for allowing me to go a little bit longer.
It's okay.
You're a good egg, and thank you so much for the wisdom and experience you've shared around that. And I think, again, for all of us, from whichever generation you might be tuning in from, just remember, we've all got something to learn from one another. We all have something to give. We've all got something to learn. And I think if we can come together and focus on what keeps us or what makes us similar rather than focus on differences, I think the world will be a happier, kinder place.
Agreed. Totally.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.